Hello, hello. Welcome to Reading Time. My name's Time, and today we're going to be continuing the 100 Kids Book Bucket List Challenge. Today's reading is going to be comprised of our first series of the challenge, a series of unfortunate events. Let's get to reading. All right, a series of unfortunate events, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, is a series comprised of 13 volumes detailing the lives of the Baudelaire children. To summarize the very long series in just a sentence or two, this series is told from the perspective of a mysterious researcher who tells the tales of Violet, Klaus, and Sunny Baudelaire and their journey through a series of unfortunate events. Now, I have some mixed feelings about rating this series for a few reasons. On the one hand, this is a series that I have had for years, one that I started reading in third grade and stopped reading once the 13th book was published and I had read it. But looking back on this series before I reread it, I could not tell you some of the plot lines of a good majority of the books because they didn't stick with me. So as I read it this time around, I decided that I wanted to take a look at each book individually and rate it on a scale of 1 to 5 stars based on how much I liked each individual book. And then take the series as a whole and get an average rating from the individual ratings. With that being said, I would give a series of unfortunate events 4 out of 5 stars. I definitely like the series. However, there are moments in the series where the plot drags on or feels repetitive. There's kind of a formulaic storyline going on in each of the novels for a good chunk of the series. And I will say the author does warn the readers multiple times, somewhere around 42 times throughout the series, that it might be a good idea to just put the book down, walk away from it, and find something else to enjoy. Because this is a hard series to get through. It can definitely be depressing at times. I've known readers who have picked up the series and drop it even before finishing the first book, or drop it after just a few books. I personally enjoy it, but I know that this dark content is not for everyone. With that being said, while I do think that this is not a series that everyone will enjoy, difficulty-wise, it can be understood from a 5th to 9th grade reading level. It's not very difficult to understand what's going on in the series, and any more complicated vocabulary or ideas are explained within context by the narrator. Content-wise, there are elements in these books that could be upsetting for some readers. So I'm going to look at the content in different categories so that you can know if this is something that you would enjoy reading or if the content may be too much for you. Looking first at violence in the series, this series does have many elements of varying forms of violence throughout it. We have violence that's done to our 3 main characters, we have violence done to other characters in the series, and we have violence done actually by the main characters at times. In most of the instances, it's more of a threat of violence than actual violence, but I will say in the first book that one of the children is hit by their guardian. So there are, concerns with that, obviously. And throughout the series, we have multiple instances of people getting murdered. often in front of the children. And while the author doesn't go into any descriptive detail, usually, that may be disturbing for some readers. As far as language goes with the series does not have a lot of swear words. Book 2 was the only one that I could find that had any swear words. And fun little fact, that actually did cause it to get banned in some school districts in the past. But otherwise, there's no swear words within the books. For substances, there are many cases of substance use throughout the books, usually just things like alcohol, especially wine or cigarettes. We do have a character who smokes a cigar at one point, so much that you can't even see their face through the cloud of smoke. But I will say that in the very last book, the children are pressured into drinking alcoholic coconut cordial. So that's probably the most problematic instance of substance usage that I can think of. The other ones are generally done by the villains of the story. As far as sexual content goes in the book, the furthest physical acts described between characters are kisses. However, I know that some people have had issues with the first book in particular because the plot of the first book is that the main villain tries to marry one of the children despite him being her legal guardian for financial gain. So there is an attempt at potential incest, and while there is no evidence that he necessarily had any sexual intent with it, it was purely financial. There are some creepy comments made toward her about how she's pretty and stuff like that by some of the other villains in the book. So that can be uncomfortable, but throughout the rest of the series, the most that we see are a couple of kisses. Now for other content. This is a depressing series. This is a series that does not necessarily get happy. The happy points are few and far in between, and they often are more bittersweet than truly happy. So I know that that in and of itself might be too much for people to want to read the series. I did have to take a break in between books 6 and 7 of the series just to kind of take a step back and get away from the nature of the content, because it is a hard one to get through all in one go. I would suggest that if you do want to get through it and you want to read the whole series, that you give yourself opportunities for breaks between some of the books, because it can be draining after a while to just hear one unfortunate event after another. Now, going into an analysis of the story, this series was very interesting to analyze. And while I did just say that it is a very depressing story and hard to get through sometimes, it is also a very humorous and enjoyable series in other aspects. This series is written with a lot of literary humor. Vocabulary as well as idioms are often explained in context, not necessarily with the exact right definition, but sometimes just taking the circumstances and using those circumstances to define the word that you're using to define the circumstances. In addition, this series uses a lot of metaphors and allusions, metaphors being comparisons between two things that don't necessarily seem to have similarities, and allusions being references to other literary works or other pop culture references. The readers themselves are also kind of a part of the story, as our narrator, Lemony Snicket, often takes a chance to speak directly to the audience at times. One prime example of a literary device that I especially love in this series is alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of initial consonant sounds, such as in tongue twisters. So if we take a look at our first book, for example, we have the bad beginning. Bad and beginning both start with that B sound and are an example of alliteration. Lemony Snicket uses alliteration in most of his names for locations in the series, as well as different people and other things such as that. But the thing that I find most interesting about this series is the setting, when and where this series takes place. And honestly, it is not clearly set or stated where or when the series takes place. There's hints throughout the series at different types of technology and names of places. For example, there are horse-drawn carriages and motorcycles described in the same sentence on the same street, but the series also has telephones with blinking lights and an advanced computer system that can supposedly detect facial features on an individual. So we see examples of older technology and relatively newer technology existing in the same space. As far as where it takes place, there are places such as Arizona and Peru and other real world places that are mentioned, but the actual locations that are named in this series are not actual locations that we see in the world. The location is also hard to identify because while the characters do measure temperature in Fahrenheit, there is an instance in book 6 where the children are questioned about whether they are xenophobic, or in other words, having or showing prejudice against people from other countries. And North America is mentioned as one of the examples, suggesting that the characters are not from North America, even though they measure temperature in Fahrenheit. So that leads me to believe that this is supposed to be some sort of alternative reality based in our world. And there are other examples as well. As if you look at online, they mention the Duchess of Winnipeg and the King of Arizona. So there are suggestions that this is an alternative timeline, an alternative reality, an alternative reality from where we live currently. One other thing I want to talk about with this series is that it is very surrealist in some senses. It definitely requires you to suspend your disbelief because there are a lot of things that happen in the series that are not feasible. They would not likely happen in real life. For example, we have an instance where a character uses just her teeth to duel someone else with a sword. And we have another example with the same character where they use their teeth to climb an elevator shaft. So there are definitely elements of the story that are above and beyond real life. And in a lot of ways, because of this and other examples I'll list, this series plays around with the genre of Gothic fiction quite a bit. Gothic fiction is generally identifiable by its focus on mystery and horror, paired with secret passages, old buildings and ruins, and supernatural creatures or events. Think of something like Dracula as an example of Gothic fiction. And oftentimes the characters are also presented as being haunted by their past. The series of unfortunate events plays with all of these elements, especially as the series continues. There's a lot of secrets that are brought to light, and we get secret codes and secret organizations. And the narrator, Lemony Snicket, definitely is someone who is haunted by the past as he's recounting these events that the Baudelaire children go through from a future point of view. I would also say that the art style, if you take a look at this first page, the art was done by Brett Hellquist and is very reminiscent in my mind of kind of a gothic style and is seen throughout all of the books. So this series is a very enjoyable one, especially if you're someone who appreciates literary humor. There's so much that I could unpack in probably each book, but I will leave it at that for now and just say that, once again, I recommend this series. I definitely like it. But if you are someone who doesn't think you can get through it, then that's totally fine. This may be a series that you can skip without any issues. Now, as always, I would love to hear your thoughts on a series of unfortunate events. Is this one that you have read? If you have read it, were you able to make it all the way through? If you were, what did you think of the ending? Because I have some thoughts. Please feel free to subscribe and follow me on social media. With that, have a marvelous day and a wonderful read.